I am interviewing Mr. M. Robinson Baker, civic leader and fraternal leader of the YMCA. Mr. Baker, when did you first become interested and know of the YMCA of Oakland?
Well, my first acquaintanceship with the YMCA goes back to the early 1920s. I would say my very first experience, or my very first acquaintanceship, was sometime between the years of 1923 to 1928, when the Y was located in the 3400 block on Market Street, that is on the west side of the street. And at that time, Mr. Watkins was the executive secretary. And I don't know for sure how long it remained in that area, but it was in a private residence. And I finished high school at Oakland High School, left here and went down San Joaquin Valley to Modesto to finish to go to junior college. And during that time, the Y moved from Market Street down to 8th and Filbert, another house. And Mr. Watkins was still the executive secretary and remained there for a number of years. Now, during the time from 1929 to 35, I was away from Oakland, as I said, originally down in Modesto going to school, and I went up to Chico State College up there, at Chico, California. And the Y moved again from 8th and Filbert to 8th and Linden, and to an old building there. I'll never forget it, belonged to a man who was quite a person in the community. In fact, the one thing about it, he was commonly known as Mr. First and Me for years. His name was Aaron Clark. The building belonged to him, and the Y moved into that building. I stayed there for a number of years, and this is when you might say, to my knowledge, the first real bona fide executive secretary was hired by what is now the Metropolitan Association. They brought a man into the Y named Richard Smith. And Smith took the Y out of the building, or the house there at 8th and Linden, out to another house out on 36th Street. The address there was 836 36th Street. And that building belonged to a man by the name of Johnson, who worked for the county, down the Alameda County Court building. Well, originally was on Broadway, and but Mr. Johnson at this time, when I became acquainted, he was working for the some capacity the courthouse down there on Fallon Street. And this is actually when I became involved in the Y.M.C.A. as, shall we say, as a staff person, or was one of the hired hands. Because this was done when I returned to Oakland in 1937, and Dick Smith was still the executive secretary, and he was trying to put together a real honest-to-goodness YMCA program. And in those days, if anyone can remember, this is right during the heart of the Depression, so they did then what they are trying to do, or they are doing in many instances now. The federal government was funding programs for agencies such as the YMCA. And that's how I happened to get actively engaged in YMCA work as a paid person. And like I said, I started in there on 36th Street and worked with as a boys work man, a program man, and through this federally granted program. And that's where I got to know a whole lot of the young people that you and your brothers, and the Romine brothers, and Wilbert Bright, Morris McGee, Bernard Matoyer, who you know now as attorney Bernard Matoyer, and his brother Chester. Some of the older fellows that came along at that time along with me were Marion Wilde, who is now retired naval civilian employee in Hawaii, and Bill Hill, if he isn't retired, he's on a threshold of retirement as a civilian employee at the Naval Shipyard of Vallejo. Another man that I have to call, whose name I have to call because he was very, very effective in the work of the association at that time. Very helpful in keeping a wonderful program going among the younger kids. When I say younger kids, I mean the what we call the preschoolers now and the elementary school youngsters down at Cole School and elsewhere in West Oakland. That's Sam O'Connor. He was really one of the foundation rocks of the North Oakland Y.M.C.A. program at that time. Another man that we can't overlook too, he worked with me very closely, and that was Paul Ford, commonly known as Paul Filbert Ford. He just retired here recently from as a civilian employee for the Navy. Mm-hmm. And these are fellows that too that have both of them, Sam O'Connor and Paul Ford, would have a great deal to add to the knowledge of that time and how things were. Because I could talk at length about it, but I don't want to be guilty of repeating myself. But we tried to put together what was what you would consider an orthodox or conventional type of YMCA program for our young people, particularly elementary, junior high, and high school youngsters. And we did have some sort of a program going, or try to get it going, for the older young men. And as you possibly remember, and kind of help refresh my memory on some of the things that we did. One thing that I was interested in, and I think that I had some measure of success with, was the group we call the North Oakland High Y. And that's where your two brothers, Fowler and Felix, Buzzy Romine, Roger Romine, Morris McGee and those fellows, they were a little younger. They came along behind them, but let's see, what were they? I think they would be my gray high Y, but the original group I point out, your brothers, no, they were my high Yers, and they carried on all the usual high Y activities. And of course, so far as the athletic program, we had to use what is now, what we use the facilities over at Hoover Junior High School, use the gymnasium for athletic activities, and use 836 36th Street for our, what you would say, our club room and organizational activities. And then also we had some semblance of a dormitory at that building at that time. We had a number of fellows who stayed there in residence. I'd like to take one of the men that who stayed there for a number of years was George Bias. I no doubt you remember him. He's retiring as a medical technician from Franklin Hospital now. And as I called Marion Wilde, he was a resident there. Bill Hill was a resident there. And one fellow whose name I didn't call, who stayed there for a long time, and I see him right in the neighborhood occasionally. I don't know if you remember, he was older than most of us fellas. A fellow named Jim Coleman. You remember him?
Yes, I do recall.
Coleman is retired as a Pullman porter. He still walks around here and has still the same stature and still the same gait he's had in that time. Mm-hmm. He was quite a mature gentleman in those days, and this is mature, but he doesn't show any signs of advanced age, but he's still here with us. Mm-hmm. The man who was responsible for the total ongoing of the North Oakland Y at that time was Richard Smith, who died during his 10-year service. I think Smith died about 1930. Must have been 1938. Because I started work there in '37. I worked for him about a year, a little over a year. Now, one of the interesting things about it, though, is about the association at that time was the fact, and I I have to say this because so many of our younger generation now give us old folks, or people of my generation, and yours if you please, they want to give us down the country because they felt we didn't do nothing. Well, first of all, I think they should keep this in mind, that at that time we were in the throes of one of the worst depressions this country's ever known. They talk about unemployment now. So they didn't know what unemployment was. You just didn't have any job, period, because there was no work.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have the big, wide industrial base and the general acceptance, employable acceptance that you have now. In our community, if a man wasn't a railroad man working with the Southern Civic or Western Civic or the Pullman Company, well, 99 chances out of 100, you were just unemployed. We had a few postal employees, and we had a handful of guys, you count them on one hand almost, who were in the fire department. You didn't have any policemen, so to speak. You didn't have anybody in the city or county or state civil service in any appreciable numbers. In fact, that was just unheard of. Now, at the same time, you say, well, how in the world did you work an association program in those circumstances? Well, you may do what you had to work with. You took what you had and you made something out of it. You had some good people, and even though I look back now, and I would talk about them rather harshly, but I have to be reasonable and kindly in my thinking, because after all, those people had the courage of their convictions. They had a certain type of training experience that conditioned them. So we have to let it go at that. I have to accept it at that. Of course, this is the sort of thing that would be very, very, very severely criticized in this day and time. But nevertheless, men who actually were the policy-making group, the board of managers for the association, I knew most of them. One of them I'm still very closely associated with, and he and I are very, very good friends. One of the peculiar things of that always I have to remember, I say this here, and I say this to help the thinking, or to help straighten out some of the thinking of some of our youngsters nowadays. We always hear so much about prejudices and racial attitudes. One other time you get a hold of somebody, you only want to label them being with something or another. My ambition when I went to work for the association was to become a Y.M.C.A. secretary. After I started working, I thought that was a great deal. Mm-hmm. But I was denied that privilege, along with the privilege of teaching school, which I have a credential as a school teacher, which I never used. And both of the ideas, both the reasons were because of my racial identity. However, there wasn't so much racial identity. I should correct this and say that it wasn't so much my racial identity so far as going the association work. But at that time, it wasn't popular. It wasn't an accepted thing for a brother, as we refer to people nowadays, of my particular hue, mm-hmm. Pigmentation, yeah. to be accepted as an association secretary. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of other things that happened in those days. In those days and time, it was, you had to fall on a particular color spectrum in order to be accepted. Well, like I say, I accept that now as a blessing in disguise. Now, at the same time, I had to be, I say that in passing, with a certain degree of, shall we say, of facetiousness, but that nevertheless it was there, and it must be taken as a matter of fact. We ran into some difficulty too. You ran a little difficulty with program-wise, because you had to be very careful in scheduling program activities to make sure that you didn't make too many big waves and you wouldn't upset somebody, particularly somebody downtown who wasn't ready to accept certain things that we in our community were doing. I take, for instance, I had to have a special day, a special hour to take my high Y kids and my gray Y kids and the Indian guys down to the association for a swim. And you would take, if someone came here and we didn't have space to put them up at the Northwest Y, and one of our, we only had, let's see, 1, 2, 3 bedrooms upstairs there. And if somebody came along, we didn't have space. We had to have almost have a special convening of the Metropolitan Board of Directors and a special dispensation in order to get one of our brothers into one of the dormitory rooms downtown.
Oh, my.
Of course, now you can see that with the action of World War II and all the things that went along with it, all that's been changed.
Yes.
And we're thankful for that.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, this is the sort of thing that you had to work with. You had to deal with at that time. While we were, shall we say, we were more or less required as a way of life to accept it, we managed to get along. We had, I think, the men that I know and still have, we did have, in spite of those hardships and those sort of things, those untoward happenings, we did have some good times along with them.
Yes, I see.
Go ahead.
Is the Y the center or central branch, or the central Y located in the same area now that it was during those days?
Oh yeah, it was right downtown. It was that street is now is 21st and Telegraph. In those days was Hobart and Telegraph. That's a central building. Housed in that building is what is now referred to as the Central Division, but it was just simply known in those days as the Central Y, and also the YMCA in those days was known as the Oakland Y.M.C.A. And you only had just the, shall we say, just had the two parts. The Central Y downtown, which served all other areas in Oakland, and you had this, which was known up until they built the building there where it's now Market and Rockers. It was known as the North Oakland Y.M.C.A. Originally, when it was on, like I said in the beginning, when I first became acquainted with it back in the 20s, it was just known as the colored branch.
Nice.
It was designed to serve the colored community.
Mm-hmm.
And then as things change, you change your label.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. That's true. Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, during the days of the North Oakland Y.M.C.A., could you tell some of the things that the young men did, the arts and crafts, involved with this type of thing, or the structure, perhaps, of the area?
well, so far as an arts and crafts in the 36th Street building, we weren't too much interested so much in arts and crafts.
Mm-hmm.
Our program was more of a physical program. Primarily, we were using, as I said, we were using Hoover Gymnasium for our basketball games, volleyball games, and such. Softball, we had a softball team, and like. But arts and crafts as such, no, we didn't get involved in that.
I see. Mm-hmm. You mentioned two clubs within the North Oakland Y, the High Y. Would you explain more about this?
Well, the High
age
Y,
group?
the High Y was a Y group that was composed of high school students,
Nice.
and it carried on a program that they would try to, along with the physical program, to give some degree of spiritual emphasis along the YMCA motto is spirit, mind, and body. That's why you get the triangle in the YMCA symbol. And in the club, in this club framework, you would try to give the youngsters an opportunity to develop leadership among themselves so that they would take on future leadership responsibilities as they grew older. At the same time, give them a chance to work off some of their steam and nervous energy through their various physical activities. I remember back, and I think about some of the fellows that your two brothers, and just mention a few of them, Field and Fowler, and Roger and Buzzy, Ernie Allen, let's see, Eddie Roberts. Just I can't remember all of them right offhand, but just name a few. And then I got a little insight I'll tell you about that too. Them me being the leader for those fellas.
Yes.
To me, they were some of the greatest youngsters I've ever seen. And we had, yes, it was my club, and I'm proud of them, and I was proud of it as a club. They were just great. But one thing, one time, don't forget, one time they decided to fire me. You know, I will get this. Something they wanted to do, and as you know, the adult leader, which I was, you tried to negotiate all situations and decisions and program desires, all that sort of thing. And something came up that they wanted to do wasn't exactly in keeping with YMCA policy, and I turned them down. Of course, I guess I didn't use very much tact in doing it, and I didn't give them a chance to express themselves possibly as you would do in this day and time. And as a result of that, they went off and had a meeting of their own. They came back and told me that they wanted to replace me as a leader, and that they were putting me on notice.
I see.
And I never forget, the only reason why I wasn't discharged out of hand is because I had a couple of mothers around here in my corner. And namely, one of them was Mrs. Beckford. Do you know that lady?
Yes, I do know.
And also the lady came, this is our serious. And then there's the late Mrs. Romine.
Yes.
They took call all those sons, and Eddie Roberts' mother called them all and told them, look, you guys are going to fire Beckford. You guys are going to go on back. I don't know if did you ever remember? You didn't remember that, I don't guess.
No, I don't remember that.
Come to my mind, yeah. I've been following Feeling to tell you about it.
My two brothers,
Yeah,
probably
they
could expect it. Yeah, I probably could remember it. As I recall, it was there at the Y that parents felt that their young daughters could attend any social functions at that particular area, during that area at the Y, because of the leadership that you portrayed through the boys, you and Mr. Dick Smith.
Well, one thing about it is I think Mrs. Perry, I think you better recognize in that day and time, Mom and Dad exercised a very high degree of control. When you went out the door, they knew where you were going, and they would set limits on you and so forth and so on, and that was it. And when they came over to the building over there on 36th Street for their activities, particularly when they had the co-educational activities, it was very carefully laid out and screened out with Mom and Dad first as to when it was going to start, what you were going to do after you got there, but before you got there, they determined what time you were going to get there and what time you were going to close, and approximately exactly what time you were going to get home. Now, of course, I don't know whether you can do that sort of thing in this day and time, but that was the sort of thing that the program person, which I was required to do. You had to clear all these things from the very outset. And if you didn't clear with any untoward any untoward incidents and like that, you didn't dare go to bed. If you didn't go to bed, you didn't get a chance to get much sleep because the telephone would be ringing all the time about where's Rosalind? And what was that Hester girl's name? I forget. You know,
Dorothy.
huh?
Dorothy?
Yeah, where's Dorothy? You know, yeah, another fellow was in there. I forgot to tell you, Hester was one of the fellows in my high group too. Why didn't Dorothy get home before now? Did she leave there? Who she leave with? And so forth and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So you were very careful, and the activities and the were carried on to your very best of the ability what you had, but you had to be careful, and you had to be very circumspect.
I recall you're telling me that you married in 1939. At that time, you no longer uh, became involved yourself with the business of the Y.M.C.A. But you were still interested, I'm sure. Can you tell me something about the time that you were not so involved with the Y?
Well, I
What was
married
happening?
I married October 1st, 39.
Mm-hmm.
I might go back just a little bit and say this, that I continued. The reason why, first of all, I'll say this. The reason why I left the Y is that it was finances, economics.
Yes.
There was no money
Mm-hmm.
for the program that funded my employment during the prior years, during 37 and 38. They were cut off by the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
Plus the fact the man who was the executive director, the executive secretary, Richard Smith, he passed, and the board of managers, along with the central board, or what is now known as central board in those days, but is now the metropolitan board,
Mm-hmm.
they decided they wanted a certificated person as executive secretary. And that's when they sent back east and brought Josh Rose out. And he had been on a staff at, if I remember correctly, I think he came here from, was it New Jersey or?
Yeah, New Jersey.
Anyway, I know it was back there
Mm-hmm.
somewhere.
Yes.
But anyway, and so I remained when Josh took over for a very short space of time, and I left early in '39 and started trying to break into the insurance business, which I eventually did.
Mm-hmm.
I had several jobs. One of them was I worked for the state of California as a social worker for a short period of time, and that's a job I had when Altoneer and I married.
Mm-hmm.
Then the big thing that happened though during that time was just right after Pearl Harbor, or rather it was first in 1942, I took down sick and stayed sick for right at 5 years.
I see.
So when I got back on my feet, got my family back together, and I got myself back into the insurance business, and had to run like mad to try to make up a little, quite a bit of lost time.
Mm-hmm.
However, Josh and I always remained, Josh Rose, who was executive director, he executive secretary, he and I remained in contact with each other, and we would talk, and he would try to get me to do this, that, and the other, but I never was able to take the time to become an active layman,
I see.
or serve on any of the committees, except possibly just momentarily.
Mm-hmm.
And then like I heard you saying, in a conversation just a short while ago, you know, you have children, and parents will do a whole lot of things that they're really interested in their children. Well, Alton and I had one daughter,
Mm-hmm.
as you know,
Yes.
and Josh had put in a program in the building, the building that you know now is Northwest Oakland Y over there on Market and Brockhurst.
Mm-hmm.
And the man who was running the program for the youngsters, you might say the program director, was a fellow named Pete Taylor. And my daughter would come home talking about this Pete Taylor. And one morning I looked down the front steps here, and here comes this guy Taylor walking up and telling me about he adopted himself into my family, and I've been his uncle. And he and his wife and his 4 fine boys ever since.
I see.
Which is all right too. 'Cause,
Oh,
he did a wonderful job over there for my daughter and a whole lot of other kids. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think 1 or 2 of your children were involved. And incidentally, you go back a little bit. You're talking about some people who are involved in the YMCA down through the years who are now famous community leaders. And take for instance. I call the name of Attorney Montoya. You also don't forget Lionel Wilson, your Superior Court judge.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to the war and prior to the war years, Lionel Wilson played a very, very important role in the leadership of the association. In fact, Lionel is still interested because he serves as a member of the Metropolitan Board. It takes a lot of time out of his very, very busy schedule of being a judge. Mm-hmm. But and his boys, his sons, were in this program that Pete Taylor carried on. That my daughter enjoys it very much. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, like a lot of good things, they come to an end. There were budget cuts, and as a result of budget cuts, why Pete was no longer employed by the association, or else I think that I'm correct when I say that there was some sort of budget adjustment causing him to leave. Anyway, I know that Pete left the association and went to work for Boy Scouts, and we weren't successful. We never have been successful in getting another man into Northwest Y to do the job that Pete did for our youngsters. Of course, now, I think this might be a little unfair on the part of many of us to look for carbon copies in people.
Well, yes, that's true.
As they say in this day and time, every man must do his thing in his own way. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, we never have been able to mount another Pete. Then, just before Pete left, he got on me at the same time he came over and told me about him. Me his uncle and all that. He put, shall we say, a half Nelson on me mentally, and next thing I know, I found myself serving as one of the members of the Board of Managers of Northwest Oakland Y.M.C.A. on the Josh Road, which I was very, very happy with, along with the late Carl Emanuel, who was board chairman, and then he was succeeded by George Scotland, who I'm quite sure you're acquainted with, and there's some very, very fine men there that I worked with down through the years. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm jumping from the up into a period now of around about 1953 or 54 when I became active again in the association.
Yes.
But those years from early 39 up until this time, I think my wife will refresh my memory. I think I've maintained a sponsored membership of the association. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, when I went back on become a member of the Board of Managers, was a different thing. I contributed time, and possibly my wife helped me raise a few more dollars to add to my sponsor membership.
I see. Now you're a member now of the Northwest?
No. After serving on the Northwest Board there mm-hmm. for several years, every division has representation on the Metropolitan Board. And I was selected to be the layman to represent the interests of the Northwest Board on the Metropolitan Board, and after serving, I think, a year mm-hmm. as a Northwest representative, and I was elected to the Metropolitan Board on my own.
I see.
I don't know why, but I have been. I think I'm serving. I'm in the middle of my. In fact, I know I'm ending my second term as being elected a member of the Metropolitan Board. It has been very interesting. I've learned a lot. I've learned a whole. If you might say, you might say, well, I heard a whole heap of things I learned being on that downtown board.
On the downtown board.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I might say this too, that the YMCA is a totally different organization. I mean, it's a different organization from the organization that I first become acquainted with way back in the 20s. Naturally, it should be because of the change of times and the demands that the social demands that are made on every agency of its kind. The YMCA at this time is struggling mightily. It's sometimes they almost. I know John Toon was the general secretary, and Dave Way, who was the president of the Metropolitan Board, and some of the rest of the fellows who have responsibilities for its ongoing. Feel that they almost feel that they like the little boy with the finger stuck in the hole in the dike. They want to take the whole the flood back, but they keep on trying anyway. Sometimes I get a little discouraged, and I tell my wife I'm gonna put them down, I'm gonna give them up, and I kind of find it's like a fire horse. You hear the bell ring, and you smell the smoke of the fire, and the first thing you know, you're down the street trying to find out where the fire is, help put it out.
I see. Because of your involvement in the community for many years through the YMCA and in insurance, in your opinion, what can laymen help to guide? What way can laymen help to guide our young people?
Well, I think one of the best ways that any of us can do to help our youngsters is to make ourselves, protect ourselves as the best possible example for our young people to observe. And I use this word, and I use it very carefully, that our young people to emulate. And I say that I want our young people to not only to equal what we do, but to be inspired to excel that which we have done or what we do. You know, too many instances you find that our young people are placed in a position where they have nothing to encourage them, but so as a result that they do nothing but imitate, and they learn things by rote. They learn how, but there's no learning why, and that's why I use the word that they should that we must place ourselves in a position where the young people who come along behind us will emulate what we do, so they will be encouraged and inspired to excel us in all of our endeavors. We've got to encourage the youngsters to be willing to take that which we have started and continue to build. One of the things that always concerns me is this: that many of us in my generation, we're the greatest originators of an idea and put it into action, but there's no perpetuating that idea after we go to the graveyard.
Yes.
The idea goes right in the grave with us, and we make no provision for its continuity. This is what I'm talking about when you talk about providing the vehicle and the means of encouraging our youngsters to follow behind. Now, one of the best ways is for our youngsters to realize that they can follow us. They will emulate that which they see in us, is for we laymen to do a little extra duty as a matter of service over and beyond our paychecks, and put ourselves in the most favorable, shall we say, showcase for the young people to observe us and be willing to, as you might say, to buy that which that they see, and say that this is what I like, this is what I would want to do. And to me, I have found that one of the best means for me to do that sort of thing, which I very, very, very firmly believe in, is that through my activities through the association. That's why I have remained with them down through the years, and if everything else works out and Altonia still supports me in my ambitions and my desires, I think I'll be around the association for a few more days to come.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. M. Robinson Baker, for your kindness. I've enjoyed talking with you about the days of the Y.M.C.A. in the 30s and what is happening in the Y today in Oakland. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.